Welcome. Today we're talking about economy, but specifically the economy around the agriculture sector. With me is Paul Makube. Paul, welcome.
Thanks for having me.
Paul, let's just first put it into perspective. The role or the size of agriculture relative to the economy, how big is it and what's the contribution?
Thanks again for having me. Yes, agriculture, an important part of the South African economy. And in fact, just to start with, our contribution as agriculture in South Africa relative to other economies on the continent is much, much smaller. So in Africa, it is agrarian economies, agriculture dominating. In South Africa, we're just 2.5% and below, depending on the year, as its contribution. Now, that's primary agriculture. Its contribution to the economy. If you look at forward and backward linkages that the agriculture has with the rest of the economy, we're talking about 7 to 8% contribution of agriculture, looking at the other immediate sectors that are closely linked into the value chain of agriculture. Now, that's the contribution of agriculture. If you look at manufacturing, it takes about 70% of its requirement from the agricultural sector. So that's quite a contribution into the agricultural economy. 2.5%, one can say small, but if you look at that, backward and forward linkages, quite a good contribution. And I think the most important thing also is that if you look at the other sectors of the economy that have grown significantly over the years, that's the reason why you have that contribution really dropped. Not that agriculture is not performing.
And I think people make the mistake of not looking at the value chain all the way from, let's say, the seed input to the food on your plate. But let me talk about the agriculture sector currently. In terms of the cost, the input cost, the sector, elements of the sector is under pressure. Your view? Yes,
it has been, the sector has been under pressure for almost 1.5 years now. And this is a spillover effects of developments on the international market. We saw COVID-19 coming in, impacting on logistics, the supply of raw materials for manufacture of inputs into the agricultural sector. We don't saw last year in February the invasion of Ukraine and the war broke out. A spike in prices of commodities, particularly that impact on the agricultural sector. That is your crude oil prices, your fertilizer prices, your pesticides and herbicides. So if you look at that agrochemicals complex, a spike in prices, and that has an immediate impact on the grain sector, grain and oilseed sector in South Africa, the fruit sector as well, and indirectly the livestock sector. Because if you look at the livestock sector, it depends on maize, which is produced using those inputs. So that is the spillover effects of events on the international market. Of course, you add a relatively weaker exchange rate into the mix.
And that then leads to inflation that again leads to interest rate hikes. What's your view on interest rate and how does it impact on the agriculture sector?
Exactly. So that's what we saw. And by the way, in contrast, on the international market, if we look at global food prices, they have been in deceleration in the last 8 months. So we have our own problems here. We've got a load shedding problem. We've got logistic challenges, and that impacted on the inflation, which remains outside the Reserve Bank target of between 3 and 6%, and hence the current trajectory of interest rates on an upward trend. And it appears, if you look at on the international market, the trend is also upwards. And we are likely to see the situation that in the in the short to medium term, we still remain with elevated interest rates. It will take some time before we see cut into interest rates. Either we're going to go flat or a cut, much later.
Paul, the export side. We export almost all of our fruit, and we've had challenges. What are you seeing?
Yes, we have done well in terms of exports, and if you remove all the challenges with the logistics, the costs that emanated from COVID and the war, the export sector for agriculture has been doing fantastically well. Expectations are that we are going to see, we are already seeing moderation in prices of freight, an improvement in logistics elsewhere. Obviously, for the country itself, it's still a long way to actually fix that, but things will improve as we go into 2023, 2024. And on the demand side, on the international market, no significant problem of demand. It's a question of getting the fruit across into the international market. In terms of maize, for example, which is another product that is now going out, the last 2 years has been fantastic for maize.
Paul, thank you very much. And on that positive note, it's great to hear the positive impact of agriculture. Thank you very much.
Thank you for having me.
Well, at least it seems that we're moving again into a normalized situation with demand there, costs coming down. It might just be a great year. Thank you for joining me. Theo Vorster, good day.